Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the most absolutely fascinating anomalies in music history. We are unpacking the ultimate pop music upset of 1967. We're talking about a moment when a massively anticipated release was just stopped dead in its tracks on the charts. But as you'll see today, that supposed failure actually hit a brilliant masterclass in Baroque pop, completely redefined how music was promoted, and literally changed the course of album history forever. Okay, let's dive into this, starting with the very important number 11. Leading up to February 1967, the Beatles had secured 11 consecutive #1 singles on the UK charts. This wasn't just a winning streak, you guys. It was a total cultural phenomenon. From 1963 onwards, their dominance felt way less like a chart record and more like an unavoidable law of nature. For the biggest band in the world, dropping a new single was basically a guaranteed victory lap to the top. And that sets the stage for a truly legendary David versus Goliath chart battle. In one corner, you have the Beatles, armed with their very first new music since retiring from live touring, the incredibly hyped Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever. In the other corner, you have Engelbert Humperdinck, a relatively unknown singer at the time, who stepped in as a last-minute TV replacement to perform a country-tinged breakup ballad called Release Me. The whole world expected an absolute knockout for the Beatles, but, well, the universe had other plans. So the crucial point is how the chart rules actually worked back then. The Beatles decided to release their new record as a double-A side. This meant both Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever were promoted as equal lead tracks, which gave fans incredible value for their money. But under the UK chart protocol of the time, the sales for a double-A side were tallied individually. Because buyers were picking up the record for both tracks, the total sales were effectively split right down the middle. Let's look at how that actually played out mathematically. Humperdinck's Release Me had a staggering surge, selling up to 127,000 copies in a single day after his TV appearance, and that ultimately secured him the #1 spot. The Beatles, meanwhile, had massive overall sales. We're talking considerably more total records sold than Humperdinck, but because the chart compilers counted Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields separately, their massive numbers were halved. They were mathematically penalized by their own generosity, locking them at #2. You can just imagine the field day the media had with this, right? The British press, who were already speculating that the Beatles might disband since they stopped touring, eagerly jumped all over this chart placement. Headlines splashed across the country asking, "Has the bubble burst?" and "Beatles fail to reach the top." The media framed this technical runner-up status as a definitive sign that the group's reign was finally officially over. But if we look at this quote, we see the band was completely unbothered. Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr took the upset with remarkable grace. McCartney basically pointed out that they weren't even competing in the same sport anymore. They weren't trying to make a standard pop ballad, they were venturing into completely uncharted artistic territory. Section 1. Surreal Childhood Memories. McCartney and Lennon collaborated really closely here to contrast mundane reality with kaleidoscopic illusion. Penny Lane was born out of a loose concept to write about their early lives in Liverpool, taking real places like the roundabout terminus and painting them with a highly imaginative brush. On one hand, you have incredibly ordinary suburban sights, a banker with a motor car, a barber showing photographs, but the lyrics wrap these sights in a surreal, almost hallucinatory atmosphere. It's summer with blue suburban skies, yet the fireman is rushing in from the pouring rain and the nurse is selling Remembrance Day poppies, which is something that happens in November. It's summer, winter, sunshine, and rain all happening at exactly the same time. Moving on to Section 2, a musicologist explains the magic. Putting on our musicologist hats for a second, let's move to this timeline and see how this builds in the studio. The Beatles were abandoning standard rock and roll constraints and diving headfirst into what we now call Baroque pop. Starting in late December 1966, McCartney began with a very clean Beach Boys-inspired foundation of layered pianos and keyboards. But over the next few weeks, George Martin helped them score classical flutes, oboes, corps anglais, and a double bass. They were literally treating the studio as an instrument, layering these classical elements to create a thick, sophisticated texture far removed from a standard four-piece rock band. And the underlying music theory? It's wild for a pop single. It's like a giant puzzle. The song relies on a brilliant double tonic structure. McCartney starts the busy rhythmic verses in B major, completely subverts expectations by dropping into a descending B minor chord sequence, and then uses a clever E major pivot chord to slide effortlessly into a completely different key, A major, for the leisurely nostalgic chorus. To get back to the verse, he uses an F-sharp 7 pivot. It is an absolute masterclass in using key modulations to perfectly reflect shifting moods. But they felt the song still needed a crowning glory, an instrumental fill. McCartney was watching a BBC broadcast of Bach's Second Brandenburg Concerto and was mesmerized by the high, bright sound of the piccolo trumpet. So they brought in classical trumpeter David Mason, and George Martin scored a mock Baroque solo for him that easily cut right through that thick mid-range texture they had built. As Martin noted, it fused classical and rock in a way that had literally never been done before.
And for delivering one of the most famous and impossibly bright instrumental solos in pop music history, get this. David Mason was paid exactly this, a standard session fee of £27 and 10 shillings. That tiny investment provided the soaring bird-like energy that cemented the song's legendary status. Talk about a bargain, right?
Section 3. Pioneering the music video. Because the Beatles had completely stopped touring the previous year, they faced a brand new problem. How do you promote a single on television if you absolutely refuse to show up and play it live? And this brilliantly illustrates how they solved it. Directed by Peter Goldman, the promotional film completely avoids any attempt to fake a musical performance. There are no instruments being played at all. Instead of filming in Liverpool, they shot in East London, Chelsea, and a park in Kent. They rode horses, sat at an immaculately set tea table in the freezing cold, and basically created a series of images that amplified the surreal, Lewis Carroll-like themes of the song. They weren't just making a promotional clip, they were inventing the modern music video format right then and there. Section 4. From Mistake to Magical Mystery. So, we have a song that pushes the boundaries of lyrical imagery, chord structure, and video promotion. But how did it ultimately fare in the grand scheme of things? Well, if we contrast the UK chart with the American charts, a very different picture emerges. While the UK's peculiar double A-side rules artificially stalled the record at number 2 behind Engelbert Humperdinck, the US Billboard Hot 100 didn't have the same restriction. In America, Penny Lane easily soared to number 1, initiating a massive cultural conversation that really elevated pop music from mere teen entertainment into a serious art form. But there was some collateral damage. George Martin later called releasing Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields as an early single the biggest mistake of my professional life. Why? Because the Beatles had a strict policy of not including previously released singles on their upcoming albums. By putting these tracks out in February to satisfy the label, they were forced to leave them off the S.G. Peeper album, completely abandoning the original Liverpool childhood concept that was actually supposed to anchor that whole record. Fortunately, the songs weren't lost to the ether of standalone singles. Against the band's typical preference, Capitol Records included both Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever on the U.S. release of the Magical Mystery Tour album later that year in November 1967. This move cemented their transition from brilliant studio experiments into lasting album fixtures that fans could cherish in a full-length format. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the question it raises. Penny Lane was the record that allegedly proved the Beatles' bubble had burst, all because it peaked at number 2 in their home country. But when you look at the immense legacy, the Baroque production, the dizzying key modulations, the outright invention of the music video, it leaves us to ponder, does a chart position truly measure musical genius? It turns out, sometimes the most enduring masterpiece is disguised as a simple runner-up. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the numbers.